Sean, let's dive into the final piece to this. This is going to be, let's have a little lightheartedness fun.
Let's do it.
So as we look at the, Lindy's came out, so you knew I had to go buy that. I went out to the grocery store like 3 straight nights.
So you prefer Lindy's over Athlon?
No, I prefer Lindy's over Athlon because Lindy's is out now and Athlon's not.
Okay.
The only one I don't buy is Phil Steele.
Yeah.
I buy all of them. I'll buy Street and Smith. I'll buy, and it was Sporting News for a while. I'll buy Athlon. The only one I don't buy is Phil Steele because it's like reading a foreign language or code. It's like, I can't, there's just too much. I can't do it.
I would collect them on our summer trips and we would be driving and my parents would be driving us down south or like down out west to Oklahoma or somewhere for trips. And we would stop in the gas station. I went in every gas station with my dad because I wanted to see regionally who was on the front of the magazines. That was like one of the best parts of the trip, stopping at the gas station and checking out the magazines. Absolutely.
And I'd be lying if I said that my wife and I didn't go on a cruise recently, like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And when she looked at my backpack and saw that I had 5 preseason magazines, she was like, seriously? Hey, gonna be a lot of reading time. You got your Karen Kingsbury book. This is what I got.
This is what I
have. This is what I got. Lindy's is only one out so far. That's why I'm reading Lindy's, but that's out. We've seen all these online preseason top 25s. So what Sean and I are going to kind of have some fun with here as we wrap up is looking at who are the teams that we believe are overrated and underrated. I think that Notre Dame is in an okay spot with most people. Like they're between like 6 to 10. I've seen one at like 12 or 13. Those are outliers. I think 6 to 10 is I'm comfortable with. I would probably have them higher than like 8 or 9, but it's not like they should be 5 and they're 8. You're idiots and you're way off. Like, come on. It's like a few spots and whatever. We can have this conversation.
Right.
So I think they're close-ish to where they should be. And we'll have a show down the road where we'll talk about where we specifically think Notre Dame should be ranked because we'll come out with our own top 10 at some point in time this summer. But they're looking around the country about where other teams are ranked. We are going to give you 3 teams that we think are overrated coming into the season and why. 3 teams that we think are a little bit underrated coming into the season. And then we're going to give you a sleeper team. So, and then, like I said, we'll wrap it up by talking a little bit about Clemson. So, Sean, the first team that you and I believe is overrated is the same. Our first and third are the same. I don't remember who your second was. Did we have the same 3? I had an SEC team number 2.
SEC, I had Florida.
Okay. Then our number 2 is not the same, but our number 1 and our number 3 is the same. Our number 1, and I know someone in your family, 2 people in your family are not going to like this very much, but I think the ranking of USC is absolutely patently absurd.
Absolutely.
Like, so you're telling me that Lincoln Riley is going to go to USC, take some of his coaches and players, inherit a team of 4-8 last year, and be better than what they were at Oklahoma last year. That's the thing. Oklahoma hasn't been in the playoff the last 2 years.
No.
And Oklahoma goes out and gets, they didn't even have, Lincoln Riley didn't coach the bowl game. Bob Stoops did. Right. And so, it's not even like you could say like Oklahoma, finished the year in the top 10. That's because of what Bob Stoops did, not because of what Lincoln Riley did, because going into that bowl game where I'm trying to look what their ranking was going to the bowl game. See here. Where's the schedule? Yeah. They were 16th going into the bowl game. And they had climbed up to number 4. They're number 8 or number 8 in the rankings. And then they got smacked by Baylor. And then they fell to 13, barely beat Iowa State, 7-6 Iowa State team. Then went to Oklahoma State and lost, and they were 10th, and they fell to 16. So you're going to tell me he's going to be 10 spots or so higher at USC than he was at Oklahoma just because he took some of the players there and some of the coaches, and his best assistant coach is still in Norman, O-line coach.
Yeah.
And he inherits a team that went 4-8 last year and lost their best players. That's absurd.
Yeah.
I just look, is USC going to be better? No question. but 6-6 is better. 8-4 is better.
Yeah.
How much better? To me, that's the difference. And I think it's insane that people are predicting USC as a playoff contender coming into the season.
Look, they're just not ready in the trenches.
No.
And you can talk about
both sides.
The last game of the season, and Notre Dame's going to push them around.
Yep.
They're going to push them around. But I look into the conference. Utah is going to push them around.
Mm-hmm. UCLA.
Oregon's going to push them around.
Yep.
There are too many teams that are good on both sides of the ball in the trenches. And I just don't see them running through, just being able to line up, especially if he's going to line up. Well, we know he would prefer to run counter all day and go play action.
And like the G wraps and the
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
He would prefer that. He can't do it this year. He can't do it.
So you got to move people to do that stuff.
Yes. And Caleb Williams is probably going to have to throw the ball on average 45 to 50 times a game for USC to have a chance. Once again, defensive side of the ball, defensive line, not stout enough. They had some talent transfer in at the linebacker position. So the linebackers should be much faster than what they were. They had some injuries in their recruits over the last 2 cycles that are really damaged their depth at the linebacker position. And normally they're able to recruit defensive backs in the state of California. But they'll
have skill.
Yes.
I mean, and that's why we're not like, oh, they're going to go 4-8 again. They're going to have skill. Not only the guys coming back, but the guys that they brought in as transfers. They're going to have skill. Yeah. This isn't a 7-on-7 league.
Yeah.
This is still tackle football. It may not be in 10 years, but for now, it's still tackle football.
Yeah.
So I don't understand. I don't understand that obsession that people have with USC. Again, because it's not even like Oklahoma the last 2 years has been Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma has had 2 back-to-back perceived down years.
Yeah.
Now, their down years are still like, 9-2, 10-2, and things like that, but they have underachieved the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand why people perceive them the way that they do. And it's a little mind-boggling, to be completely honest with you. I mean, they struggled to beat Texas both of the last 2 years, and Texas has stunk the last 2 years.
Yeah.
They've struggled against Iowa State the last 2 years.
They have.
So I don't understand. I don't understand it. Yeah, they lost to Iowa State by a touchdown, and they had 2 wins over Iowa State by a touchdown in the last 2 years. So I just don't understand. This is at Oklahoma. So I don't get the. I think Lincoln Riley is a very good, a brilliant offensive mind, but he also hasn't proven that he can turn a program around. He inherited a great situation.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think they're vastly overrated.
And let's be real. Let's be real. They go to Utah. They go to UCLA. They go to Stanford, a team that dominated them physically last year. And Stanford was injured, Brian. That wasn't the best Stanford team. Right. They're going to be better. They physically dominated USC last season.
Right.
That's not an easy win. They go on the road to an improving Oregon State program. And then Notre Dame, they have the capabilities of losing 4 to 5 games easy.
Yeah. I mean, and will they? I don't know. But look, like you said, at Stanford, home against Fresno, at Oregon State. Oregon State's an improving program.
That's an improving team.
Right.
That's
Arizona State at home. Right. Arizona State and Washington at home should be wins. At Utah.
Yes, that's tough.
Bye week at Arizona should be a win, but Arizona's getting better. Cal at home, Colorado at home should be wins. And then you look at UCLA and Notre Dame. So a team that lacks depth, a team that lacks physicality is going to play their 2 most physical opponents in the last 2 games of the year. And, I don't see it. 9-3 at best is USC to me.
Yeah.
At best. And that puts them in the top 25, right?
Yeah.
But, I don't see it with USC this year. And it wouldn't shock me if they're 9-1 and ranked in the top 10 coming into the UCLA game.
I hope they are.
Right. I could see them, losing only to Utah, and because they don't really, because we talked about like Oregon State, they're still not very good football teams. No. It's a pretty soft schedule.
Yeah.
They play Rice non-conference, Fresno non-conference. They don't play Oregon in the regular season. They don't play Washington in the regular season, although Washington wasn't that good last year. They do play Utah because they're in the South.
Yeah.
And then they play UCLA and Notre Dame. So I don't see it with USC. Number 2. My number 2 most overrated team, and I think you and I have a difference of opinion on this one. Not that we think that the other's overrated, but just who the number 2 is. Texas A&M.
Yeah, I gave you the wrong team.
You have A&M as well?
No. Who did you have at 3? Because I
Michigan.
Yes, okay. We did have the same one at 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I gave you the wrong 2, though. I still gave you the wrong 2.
Who's your 2?
North Carolina State.
Okay. I want to hear your thoughts on that. I'm going Texas A&M.
Okay.
And the reason I'm going Texas A&M is because again, it's like they are the new Michigan for the pollsters. Remember, for like during Harbaugh's tenure, like every year, this is the year that Michigan, I just think it's funny that Michigan made the playoff the one year that they weren't getting any respect going into the season.
Right.
But there was always this like, oh, this is the year that Michigan shows up, and it's like last year it was like Iowa State, North Carolina, and Texas A&M was the top 6. I remember some polls had them like between 6 to 8 last year. One had them at like 5 of the preseason deals. And they go 8-4 because but they were 9-1 the year before. Okay, 9-1 in an SEC only schedule in a year where COVID was just a mess. They got smacked by Alabama, barely beat a 4-loss Florida team. And then who else did they beat? Mississippi State, Arkansas, South Carolina, LSU, who stunk, Auburn. Ole Miss game got canceled. At Tennessee, fired their coach. And who do they play? They beat Vanderbilt by 5. And then they go to a bowl game, and they beat North Carolina by 14, but it was a competitive game, and North Carolina didn't have De'Ami Brown. They didn't have Michael Carter. They didn't have Javonte Williams, and they didn't have Chaz Surratt. I mean, Sam Howell was the only top player for North Carolina that played in that game, and they still couldn't really blow them out the way they did.
Yeah.
So they were overrated at number 5. So then they're a preseason top 10 team coming into this year, and they go 8-4. And it was, in my opinion, an embarrassing 8-4, to be honest with you. They have the big win, and they beat Bama. You beat Bama and win 8-4.
Yeah.
And barely beat Colorado, who's garbage. You got smacked by Arkansas, and that Arkansas game was only a 10-point game because the quarterback got hurt. KJ Jefferson got knocked out in the second half. And then Arkansas just started handing the ball off.
And the ball off. Still won the game.
Right.
Yeah.
You lost at home to Mississippi freaking State. You lost to Ole Miss on the road by 10. And then you got beat by freaking LSU, who had already fired their head football coach.
Yeah.
And, I'm just like, oh, but they beat Bama. Ooh. So I don't get it. I don't see this as a top 10 team. No. I don't think they're a top 15 team.
No.
And then they also lost some pretty good flipping players to the NFL. And in Jimbo's 4 years at Texas A&M, he's lost at least 4 games in all but the COVID year. And as I said, Sean, and the other thing we're not talking about is they lost Mike Elko too. I mean, that's the thing is Mike Elko's gone. And he was part of the reason they were even as good as they were, in my opinion. And so I do not get they lost. Kenyon Green was a first-round pick. The Marvin Leal was a third-round pick. Michael Clemens. They lost 2 of their starting defensive linemen, and they lost Isaiah Spiller, who's a 4th-round pick. So, I mean, a bunch of freshman defensive linemen are going to come in and replace those 2 studs, and you're going to be better than this year?
No.
You're going to take a kid that transferred in from LSU, couldn't stay healthy, and could barely win the job there, and that's your answer quarterback when you couldn't even – I think A&M's incredibly overrated. Incredibly overrated. And I think Alabama is going to absolutely murder them this year.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that game, Sean, is going to be competitive. And I think their schedule is tougher than I think their schedule is going to be challenging as well. And let me just quickly go through their schedule. They play Miami at home. That's not going to be a cakewalk.
No.
They play Arkansas in Dallas, or in Arlington, in the Cowboys' home. But at Mississippi State, at Alabama, that's four straight games, Sean. They play Sam Houston at the start. It's a really good FCS team, but they'll kill them. They play App State at home. They play Miami at home, Arkansas neutral field, at Mississippi State, Alabama. That's the start to their season. Then they get a bye week. Then they're at South Carolina, who's getting better. Got Spencer Rattler. Then they have Ole Miss at home, Florida at home, at Auburn, home against UMass, and then home against LSU.
That's pretty tough.
That's not an easy schedule, and they're gonna go 10-2, 11-1 against that.
Yeah,
no, not happening. Not happening.
Yeah, I'm going back and forth. I said NC State.
So let's hear the reason why for NC State, because I have some thoughts on NC State. I want to hear your thoughts on why.
My thoughts are
they're like top 15, 20. Like everybody's
top 15, 20.
Maybe might win the ACC this year. Yeah,
but their departures remind me of what North Carolina lost, and Sam Howell came back and he was pretty much by himself in that offense, and he struggled early, and then kind of righted the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what Devin Leary is kind of going to. He's not going to have that left tackle, right? He's not going to have both of his running backs, and everything's going to be on his shoulders. And I think early on they might lose a game that they're not expected to lose, and they might. And I mean, the expectations for North Carolina State are probably 10-2.
Yeah, I mean, you got people having them as like a top 15 to like, I've seen 13, I've seen 15, I've seen 19.
Yeah,
it like somewhere around there. I mean,
I just worry about Devin Leary having to do too much.
Yeah,
early on.
So I like what you're saying, because you're not saying you think he's overrated. Because I love Devin Leary.
No, not at all.
But he's just not a guy that can just put a team on his shoulders.
Yeah.
We saw that with Sam Howell last year, Sean.
Exactly.
I mean, he can't do that. I mean, like that's your point. That's the point you made, is like we saw what happened when Sam Howell lost all those weapons, and he couldn't put the team around him wasn't good enough for him to put him on his shoulders. He's not Lamar.
Yeah.
Right.
And they'll get better. And by the middle of the season, okay. But I'm not so sure early on.
And their schedule's not super easy either.
No.
They start at ECU, which is not a cakewalk.
No.
They have Texas Tech at home. They play at Clemson, home against Florida State, not going to be easy. At Syracuse. Syracuse is an ascending team, in my opinion. Home against Virginia Tech, home against Wake Forest, no cakewalk. Home against BC, no cakewalk. At Louisville, at North Carolina. There's a lot of losable games.
Those 4 weeks from Wake Forest to
North Carolina.
North Carolina, that's because I think Wake Forest I would take Wake Forest right now.
Even with it being at NC State?
Yeah, I would take Wake Forest right now. I think North Carolina, by the middle of the season, I think Notre Dame is catching North Carolina at the right part of the season, which is early on.
Yeah, you and I agree on that.
Yeah, because they were a young team last year. I think they're going to be even better.
They were overrated last year. They're being a little underrated
this year. Yeah. Absolutely. That's, like you said, that's a tough
I feel that the way you feel about Wake is the way I feel about Boston College. That game, that game against Boston College. Let me say this about NC State. I love Devin Leary. He's a winner.
Yeah.
My biggest concern with NC State is more about Dave Doran. He just has not shown me he can string back-to-back good seasons together. And it's years when the team is kind of expected to be good is when he's had some issues.
Yeah.
Like it's almost kind of like he's better when the expectations aren't high.
Yeah.
And they're going to be high this year. I mean, no consistency. It's like 3-9, 8-5, 7-6, 7-6, 9-4, 9-4, 4-8, 8-4, and then 9-3 last year.
Yeah.
I think they have the talent to be a top 20 team again.
Oh, yes.
But I just don't have a lot of faith in Dave Doran.
Yeah.
That's where I'm with you on that one. He's got to show me he can string together back-to-back years, because I would argue his 2018 team was disappointing. I mean, they went 9-4, but I would argue they were a disappointing 9-4.
Yeah.
That year. I mean, the schedule was set to where they should have been better than that. I mean, they lost at Clemson. You expect that. Lost to A&M in a bowl game. Got embarrassed. Lost at home to Wake Forest. lost at Syracuse by 10.
Yeah.
Their other wins were James Madison, Georgia State, Marshall, Virginia at home, who wasn't good that year. BC at home, who wasn't good that year. Florida State at home wasn't good that year. This is 2018. That's the year that Notre Dame destroyed Florida State at home when this game Ian got hurt. Won at Louisville in 2018. They weren't that good that year. Beat North Carolina on the road. They weren't that good that year, and it beat East Carolina. So, I mean, North Carolina, if you remember, 18, they were 2-9. That was the Larry Fedora coach team.
Yeah.
So they went 9-4, but that was a very unimpressive 9-4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were expected to be better. And so I just don't have a lot of faith in Dave Dorn. And I even think his best team, the 17 team, underachieved when you consider the talent they had on that football team.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Ricky Person at running back.
Yeah.
You had defensive linemen that didn't even start on that team that played in the NFL.
Yep.
Your entire starting D line was 4th round or higher. You had a starting middle linebacker that's now starting middle linebacker for the Super Bowl runners-up, Jermaine Pratt.
Right.
You had NFL players and you were 9-4.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not a huge Dave Dorn fan as a coach. I don't think he's been able to kind of, I mean, and your quarterback was Ryan Finley.
Yeah.
Who's a good quarterback.
Good quarterback.
So I'm sorry. I said Ricky. I meant Naeem Hines and Jalen Samuels is who I meant to say they had a running back. I said Ricky Person, but that's what I'm referring to. So anyway, Sean, I think NC State's my second, and then Michigan's my third because I'm seeing a lot of Michigan in the top 10 stuff.
Yeah.
And
You sum it up because
I think Michigan's season this last year was very fluky. Number one, I think they had a lot of games you look at and say, I just don't know if that's repeatable. Yeah. You know what I felt about last year's team, Sean? And I mean this as a compliment to Michigan. This is not meant to be an insult to Michigan. Michigan's football team last year reminded me a lot of Notre Dame's 2012 football team. In that they were a good running team, great line play, had some high-level players on the defensive line, good skill but not great skill, won a lot of close games. Some of the teams on your schedule weren't as good as you thought they were going to be. You know, like Michigan beating Washington early was a lot like Notre Dame's beating Michigan State early that year. Remember, Michigan State was like preseason top 10, and you know, they ended up being like 7-6 that year. But Michigan last year beat Rutgers by a touchdown, should have lost to Nebraska. Lost to Michigan State, struggled against Penn State, should have lost that game. Great finish to the year, right? A lot like Notre Dame did that year. Once they kind of gained some confidence, you know, beat Ohio State, great win, beat Iowa, great win, and then they go to a postseason game. I view those two wins as kind of like beating Stanford and Oklahoma in 2012, right? Stanford was every bit as good as Ohio State was last year as a team, you know, top 5-ish kind of team.
Yep.
Notre Dame beats them. I think that Michigan's win was more convincing than Notre Dame's, but that's also because Stanford had a much better defense than Ohio State had. Beating Iowa was a lot like beating Oklahoma that year, right? Yeah. Beating Iowa in the conference championship game. And then they go play Georgia and they just prove they don't belong. And then now you're going into this year, the recruiting at Michigan in recent seasons has been very disappointing. So I don't think they're going to be able to just reload the way that people think that they will. You know, losing Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, there's not natural replacements to do that. And that's kind of what Notre Dame went through in 2013 when they went from national runners-up to 9-4. You know, lost Manti, didn't have a natural replacement for him. You know, lost Zach. No, they didn't lose Zach Moore. I'm trying to think. Lost Zeke Mata. You lost Manti. You lost Cap. You didn't have a natural replacement for him because your recruiting was so thin. To me, that team just lost Theo. Yeah. Lost Sierre. You know, just lost some really important pieces to that team. Kavari was there. He was still young. You just didn't have the same recipe. Yeah. Right? Yeah. In some of those games you were winning in close games, you lost the next year because you were winning. A lot of it was, let's be honest, smoke and mirrors. Right? And so you had the offseason injury to Stephon with the hernia, so he was never the same player. They just lost some really important pieces to that football team, Sean. And I think when you look at Michigan, I would argue they even have less impact players coming back, because at least Notre Dame still had Eifert coming back. You had Zach Martin coming back in 2013. You still had Chris Watt coming back. You still had Lewis Nix coming back.
Yep.
You still had some guys coming back from that football team. And I just don't know if I could say that Michigan has that, and so, yeah. And
they're going to hang their hat. They're going to hang their
Slaughter, Zeke, Theo, Manti, Tyler. Oh, they did lose Tyler Eifert off that 2012 team. That's another one. I couldn't remember if they lost Tyler or not from the 2012 team. They lost him too. Sorry, my apologies. Continue with what you're saying.
No, I'm just saying Michigan, they're going to hang their hat on their offense.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget, they lost both coordinators as well.
Right.
That's a whole nother thing.
Yep.
And will McNamara hold off the charge, to keep the quarterback position? I will say they have those quick athletes that are good with the ball in their hands.
Yeah, especially with Ronnie Bell coming back.
Ronnie Bell, AJ Henning, they have
Mike
Coburn. Yeah. They have 2 or 3 of those guys that can make their offense dangerous to cover. And, it'll be about their offensive line and whether or not they can be dominant. But like you said, just overall talent. They lost Dax Hill on the back end.
They lost 3 first-round picks. Look, let's be honest.
Yeah.
David Ajabo was a second-round pick in the same fashion in that Jalen Smith was a second-round pick.
Yeah.
It was because of an injury that happened after the fact. Jalen was in the last game of the year. Ajabo's was in prep work. Right. David Ajabo's a top 15 pick most likely if he doesn't injure his knee. And Dax was a first-round pick. Aiden Hutchins was number 2 overall. They lost 3 first-round picks from that defense.
Right.
In my opinion. Like first-round talents. Let me rephrase that. They didn't lose 3 first-round picks because he wasn't picked. Right. They lost 3 first-round talents from that defense. And Hassan Haskins, losing him is not getting enough credit because of Donovan Edwards. And I like Donovan Edwards, but Hassan Haskins was a physical beast the second half last year.
Dependable.
And he just, the line played great, but you had him just hammering Ohio State in that game. Thanks for the super chat, by the way, K. Grant. Really, really appreciate that. But I agree with you. I think Michigan's overrated. And again, is Michigan going to suck? No, they're not going to suck. I mean, the reality is their schedule is so soft that alone could get them, a little higher ranked, I think, than they should be, to be honest with you. Because they're non-conference, Sean. It's embarrassing for Michigan to have this as their non-conference. A team that's for decades has played good,
great non-conference schedules. Yeah,
this is their non-conference schedule. Colorado, all at home. Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn. They don't play Wisconsin.
Yeah.
This is their schedule. Those 3 teams, and they have Maryland at home, at Iowa, at Indiana, home against Penn State, bye, home against Michigan State, at Rutgers, home against Nebraska, home against Illinois, at Ohio State. So their schedule's not super tough, but they're going to lose at Iowa, I think. Yeah. They're going to lose at Ohio State. And then between Nebraska, Michigan State, and Penn State at home, they're going to lose at least one of those games.
Yeah.
That gets them to 9-3 against a crap schedule. That's not a top 10 team. People are talking about them being a top 10 team. They won't be. And Ohio State is going to flat out destroy Michigan this year.
Oh, they're chomping at the bit to get back in Michigan.
Yeah.
Chomping at the bit.
Yeah. And the thing is, the reason I say that, it's not just, it's payback time. That's not how really football works. That's part of it. It's because they lost their best athlete in the secondary.
Yep.
And they lost the 2 pass rushers that negated their speed. You're not going to have those guys this year. Nope. That pass rush is going to hit home like it did last year, which means you're going to have to cover longer than you did last year, and that's not a good recipe.
No.
And I don't think Ohio State's going to be any great shakes on defense this year. They're going to be better than what they were last year. And unlike the Notre Dame matchup, because I'm going to say things about that matchup that are going to sound a lot different than what I'm going to say about the Notre Dame-Ohio State matchup. But the difference is game 1 versus game 12 in that system. There's a difference. And so that's the other reason too. So that's my third overrated team, Sean. I think 9-3 is the best that they can do. And against that schedule, 9-3 is not going to be that great.
No,
and I wouldn't be completely shocked if they're 8-4.
All right.
I wouldn't be completely shocked.
Your overrated, your underrated squads.
Same conference.
Yep.
My number one underrated team this year is, my first underrated team. I don't know if they're my number one. I'd have to think about the 1 and 2, but the first one is Penn State. And I don't normally say that because Penn State's normally very overrated, in my opinion.
Yes.
And this is also partly in reaction to kind of some things that were said on our show this week. I think Penn State has been weird the last 2 years. They're 11-11 the last 2 years. They have been a very strange team. And Sean Clifford's not a great quarterback by any stretch, but I feel like he is a kid that when he is healthy and right, they win. And when I look at Penn State the last couple years, and I look at, for example, last year, you go on the road and you beat Wisconsin to start the year off. It's a good win. You beat Auburn at home. That was a good win. They beat Villanova, beat Cincinnati 24-0, and they are smoking Iowa in the first half of that game. It was like 20-3 or something like that, right?
Right.
And Sean Clifford gets hurt, and Iowa comes all the way back. And Penn State couldn't complete a pass in that game. They ended up losing 23-20. They get a bye week, and then Clifford comes back against Illinois, but he's not 100% or anywhere close to it, and they lose at home to Illinois. And then the next week at Ohio State, they give Ohio State a game. And then they smack Maryland, lose a very close competitive game to Ohio State, smack Rutgers, and then lose a really close game at Michigan State. So they lost at Iowa, who was a Big Ten championship game representative. They lost at a 10-win Michigan State team by 3. Yep. They lost by 3 to Iowa, lost by 9 to Ohio State in a very competitive game, lost by 4 at home to Michigan, who was a playoff team, and then they lost in 9 overtimes to Illinois. They were a really quality, and then their wins for the most part were not close, right? They had a close win over Wisconsin, close win over Auburn, blew out Villanova, blew out Indiana, blew out Rutgers, blew out Maryland, blew out Ball State, teams they should have. And they've got some really good players coming back on defense. They lost some guys, getting Sean Clifford back and healthy. Losing to Jahan Dotson is going to hurt. Yeah. I like Parker Washington. I like Keandre Lambert. And last year, one of the things that hurt them last year is their running backs were garbage. Nicholas Singleton is going to take over that job day one. They get the best running back in the country, in my opinion, coming in this year. Arguably the best running back in the country, Nicholas Singleton, who's going to add a lot to that run game. Now their number 1 and number 2 backs last year can now maybe become complementary players, is what they should be.
Yeah.
So I think, and they've got a good tight end. I think this is going to be a quality football team. I really do. I think they're being underrated. I've seen a lot of rankings don't even have them in the top 25, which I understand based on the last 2 years. They have not been a good team the last 2 years. But, but I'm either going to be proven right or wrong by the third game of the year because their season starts at Purdue, home against Ohio, and at Auburn.
That first game isn't easy.
First game is not easy. If they're 2-1 coming out of that, then I think I'm going to be proven correct. But they have, the thing about Penn State is they're the opposite of Michigan. They have a really challenging schedule.
Yeah.
And they play at Michigan, home against Minnesota, home against Ohio State, at Indiana, home against Maryland, at Rutgers, home against Michigan State. They don't have an easy schedule, but I just think people are not giving them enough respect this year. I think Penn State's got a chance to surprise some people this year, Sean. Who's your top underrated
Penn
team?
State, we agree on Penn State. Okay. After Penn State, I just think, man, I think their defense will be much better. They return a lot of starters on offense. BYU is going to be a challenge offensively because they're a physical team. And that matchup with Utah is one I'm going to watch early in the season. I'm going to love to watch that game because this is going to be a physical game. Offensive line is huge. They love to run the ball. They have a few playmakers that I'm looking forward to see if they can take the next step. I think BYU is underrated, and I think they're going to end up being a top 20 team. I think they're going to end up being a top 15, top 20 team. and then Tennessee.
Right.
Is
Real
my
quick
last.
about BYU.
Yeah.
Quick about BYU. You and I's number one team, or not like my number one, your number two,
Yeah.
are in a very similar situation in that we're going to know right away.
Right away. Yes.
If we're correct, because after playing South Florida in the first game, they play home against Baylor and at Oregon.
Yeah.
If they split those games and the loss is competitive, then I'm going to, because they're going to beat Wyoming, they're going to beat Utah, they're going to lose to Notre Dame, but then they're home against Arkansas. I think it's a winnable game. So to your point,
it's a tough schedule.
Yeah. If they can, and if they somehow are able to win both of those games,
that's
I
kind of like similar to what Cincinnati did. When you kind of project when your team is going to be good,
right,
and you stack the schedule,
right,
to give your team a chance to be considered for the playoff, and that's what BYU has done.
Yeah.
So
you said your third team is my second team is Boston College.
Okay.
I think Boston College is being vastly underrated this year. I don't think people are giving enough credit to what they looked like when Phil Dracovic played.
Mm-hmm.
Even the version of Phil Dracovic that was clearly not even close to 100% late in the year.
Yeah.
They were 4-2 last year with him as their starting quarterback. I saw one ranking that had them in the 60s and another that had them even lower than that. Lindy's has them at like 39. I would say that to me would be the floor. I think Boston College is going to be a much better football team than people think that they're going to be.
Yeah.
I think when you look at them last year, they went 6-6 last year. They were 2-0 in crushing teams. They didn't play anybody any good first two games.
Yeah.
And then beat Missouri in overtime. And that's kind of when teams figured out, okay, here's how you beat them without Phil Dracovic.
Mm-hmm.
They lost a close game to Clemson. And then that's when the wheels kind of fell off. Lost at Syracuse. He comes back. They beat Virginia Tech. They beat Georgia Tech. Then they lose to back-to-back games to Florida State and Wake Forest. So they didn't finish well. But they went 4-2 with Phil as the starting quarterback. And so I think they're going to be better this year. I think their schedule is not easy, but it kind of, home against Rutgers, at Virginia Tech, home against Maine, at Florida State, home against Louisville, home against Clemson. I'm not going to be shocked if they upset Clemson this year. And we'll get to that in a second. At Wake Forest, that's going to be tough. Home against at UConn, home against Duke, at NC State, at Notre Dame, home against Syracuse. So that's a very challenging schedule. But to me, that's going to keep them from being a top 25 team, maybe.
Yeah.
But I still wouldn't be surprised because they've got some dudes on that football team.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't think they're going to – and Jeff Hafley is a very good football coach.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing, too, is with all the coaching turnover this year, he was able to keep his defensive coordinator.
Right.
That was huge. And then John McNulty was a solid hire. That's a good hire for them, in my opinion. So as long as the O-line can get figured out, look, they got a 1,000-yard running back come back. They got one of the better receivers in the country coming back. Getting George tackles was huge. Jalen Gill comes back, and then Phil comes back. I think BC is going to be a much better team than people think. Having them in the 60s seems insane to me.
Yeah.
So I think – now, do I think they're going to be a top 15 team? No, because their schedule is just too hard, in my opinion. And they still don't have enough talent on defense. That's I like their defensive coordinator. He's a good young coach. He wasn't my pick for Notre Dame. He was one of the finalists for Notre Dame. He wasn't my choice.
Right.
Because I just think he needs a little bit more seasoning in that role, you know. But he's done a nice job there with not a lot of talent the last couple of years. Like the athletes at BC now are not what they were when Don Brown was there. I mean, they don't have NFL players. They used to have NFL players on defense. John Jackson, Harold Landry, the Allen kid, right? The other defensive end that they had NFL guys. This team last year didn't have NFL guys on defense, but it's getting a little bit better.
Yeah.
And he's a good coach. So I think that was important as well. Who's your number 3 underrated team? You said Tennessee, right?
Tennessee. I just love what Josh Heupel did in developing Hendon Hooker last year. The offense is going to get better. You were the first one to point this out to me when I had all the love for Georgia last year. And you were like, Sean, you need to go watch that Tennessee game because schematically, Heupel figured some things out to attack that secondary that no one else had done.
Right.
And
that was with a depleted receiving core.
That was with a depleted receiving core, which they've upgraded that through recruiting and the transfer portal. They have some difference makers, and they've improved their offensive line. look, they played Georgia tough pretty much into the third quarter. They beat Kentucky. It's a super tough team. They should have beaten Pitt in their first game. They really had control of that game until a couple of turnovers, and Pitt eventually won, and Pitt went on to win the ACC. They had a tough schedule, and I think they showed themselves well. If that defense can improve, because you saw the shootout they had with Purdue in the bowl game, they can score.
Yeah.
They're going to score. It's all about that defense and whether or not the recruits they've had over the last 2 seasons, whether or not they can come in and improve enough to get to 9 wins and maybe challenge for that SEC East. Because like I said, they gave Georgia a decent game. Now they have to go to Georgia this year, so it's
a little different animal.
A little different. That's a little different beast. But that Georgia defense, I don't anticipate the Georgia defense being as stout. Now they still have athletes. Yeah. Don't get me wrong.
They're still going to be really good, but there's top 2 good, and then there's top. Like, I thought Georgia had the best defense in the country last year. What I've said is they get too much hype is people want to make it out to like this generational, all-time great. And I just didn't think it was that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So Tennessee, in my opinion, has an opportunity to be that second team in the SEC East.
For me, with Tennessee, it's gonna be about the defense. Absolutely. It's gonna be about can Tim Banks get that defense. I was just looking to see how many starters they got coming back, and they actually have a lot of starters coming back on defense, which is important because they were super inconsistent last year on defense. You know, like at times they're like, okay, they're figuring it out, and then at other times they're like, But like you said, Sean, they had some games you're like that they lost that you're like, boy, they could have beat Purdue in the bowl game, right? I mean, could have beat Pitt, could have beat Ole Miss. I just think they wore down, and that's when some of the injuries they had. Their issue, the only concern I have about Tennessee, Sean, and I agree with everything you said. The only concern I have is similar to one I have about other teams of coaches who are in year 1 and 2, but didn't inherit a great situation. So like Marcus Freeman, what he inherited is a lot different than what Josh Heupel inherited, right? And what Lincoln Riley's inheriting. And the only issue I have with Tennessee is still depth. Like last year, they showed they couldn't afford injuries last year. They just didn't have the depth of talent last year. Are they better yet? I don't know. But you look at their schedule, like you said, it's a challenging schedule. I mean, they get LSU and Alabama both in crossover games, which is not easy. They always get Alabama because it's one of their rivals. But you get Kentucky at home, you get Missouri at home, you get Florida at home. I think that's the biggest thing for Tennessee is the fact that like to me they play at Georgia. That's a lot. This is like almost one of those years where you're glad you're playing Georgia at Georgia because you're probably going to lose to them anyway.
Yeah,
just my opinion. But what about the next group of teams? You get the next 3 best teams in your division. You get them all at home.
All at home. Yeah.
So maybe South Carolina is a little better this year. I mean, they're a bit of a dark horse for me. I got to see it with Spencer Rattler. I just, I need to see it first. But I do like what Shane Beamer's doing. But I mean, Kentucky you get at home, Missouri you get at home, Florida you get at home, and that's going to be the key. And I think they're going to beat Pitt in the second game. I do. I mean, Pitt lost way too much from last year's team, in my opinion. So I like Tennessee. I don't have Tennessee as underrated, or because I think that they're they're
ranked like what 20 in most 20s, 30s, wherever you look. I just think they can sneak up if they get one big win. And I'm not even saying if they beat Georgia. The big win would probably be against Florida. Because I think Florida beat them pretty handedly last year.
Yeah. Florida beat them 38-14 at Florida. Yeah. That was before the wheels came off for Florida.
Right.
Yeah. See, what's that rivalry looking like right now? And now the problem is Tennessee did lose some guys, though. But getting Hendon Hooker back was key.
It's really key.
See what I'm going to look and see what the recent history is like for Florida and Tennessee.
Oh, I'm sure it's heavy Florida.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Florida has won every game since 2016. So they've won 5 straight, and they've won – I mean, Tennessee beat them in 2004. Since then, beginning in 2005, Florida has beaten Tennessee in every year except for 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Yep. I think that would be and Sean, so to your
And
point, I think
that's the main SEC East rival.
but I think this is the
right?
point that I think is great that you're making is if they beat Pitt in game 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because like my thing is I don't think they're underrated because I think they're kind of between like 20 to 26.
Yeah.
And I think that's about fair. But here's what I'll say. If they beat Pitt on the road, which I think they will, if they beat that Florida game is early, that's their Stanford 2012.
Mm-hmm.
That's the giant they haven't been able to slay. That's not named Bama, right?
Right.
And then they get a bye week, and then they're at LSU. They could easily be 5-0 going to play Bama at home.
Yeah.
So let's say they lose that game. They're still 5-1. They're going to be top 15. Then they get UT Martin at home, Kentucky at home before they got to go at Georgia. And then after Georgia, they round out with Missouri at home, winnable, at South Carolina, and at Vanderbilt. That's a possible 10-2 schedule right there, Sean.
Yeah.
Which would make them a top 10 to 15 team, which then would make them underrated of people that have them outside the top 25. So that Florida game is going to be Florida LSU back-to-back with the bye in between, to me, to define their season.
Yep.
If they can win both of those games, Sean, then we're going to look back and be like, man, Sean nailed that one. He had Tennessee underrated. They went 10-2. And depending on what happens with Georgia, I mean, 10-2, could have them kind of going into some late season games thinking, gee, if Kentucky can pull off this upset, maybe we got a chance to,
win the division. Yeah.
It's unlikely, but or at least tie for the division league because then Georgia would win the head-to-head. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting. I like that pick. My third pick is Minnesota. They're my sleeper team in the West this year. And, I'm not a huge PJ Fleck fan. I think PJ Fleck's a really good football coach for that level. That's my thing with PJ. That he's at the level he should be at, Minnesota. I think that they are going to have one of the best, like after Ohio State, right? So clearly the best quarterback running back tandem in the Big Ten is the one in Ohio State. It's CJ Stroud and Travion Henderson. After that, you could make a strong case that Minnesota has the best quarterback running back tandem coming back, because if Mo Ibrahim doesn't get hurt in the opener last year, he's in the NFL right now.
Yeah.
And, he got hurt early enough to where I don't think it's going to impact him this year. He got hurt in the opener. They were working
Ohio State
before he got hurt. Yes. I think that number one, Minnesota doesn't play Ohio State or Michigan in the crossover.
Right.
And they play at Penn State and at Michigan State, which isn't easy, but losing Mike Sanford was a huge benefit. They brought back Kirk Siriaka, I think is how you say his name, from Penn State. He's the guy that helped build them up to that 11-2 team. He left to go to Penn State, which was dumb, and now he's back.
Yeah.
And he's a much more balanced guy. He's a real offensive coordinator.
Yep.
And they lost a lot.
You are sly, boy. You're good. You're good. You're good. I caught at least three. Go ahead.
So we don't need to talk about why Colorado is going to suck this year. But they got Tanner Morgan's back for his 9th year.
Yeah.
6th year. They've got 2 of their top 3 receivers are coming back. They lost a lot on the O-line. That's the only thing that gives me concern. They lost 4 starters in the offensive line, but they've got a good O-line coach. I think they'll be fine. I didn't know a lot about Joe Rossi last year, but when he was considered a candidate for the Notre Dame job, I watched a lot of film, did a lot of things. He's a good football coach. Mm-hmm. And when I look at Minnesota, Sean, they got a lot coming back from their football team. They've got 7 starters, 5 starters coming back on the offense, but again, a lot of that's the O-line. Almost all their skill comes back. Defensively, they bring back 6 starters, a lot in the secondary. They've got some good young recruits they've landed that are emerging. I think they've upgraded their coaching aspects of it. And because they were so woefully undercoached last year, it was like embarrassing.
Yeah.
And kudos to PJ Fleck for quickly recognizing the mistake that he made. And again, that's the sign of a good football coach is can you recognize right? Can you recognize when you made a mistake It took him probably a year longer than it should have to recognize that Mike Sanford wasn't the guy, but he recognized it and he moved on.
Yeah.
And so, and you look at their team last year, they lost to Bowling Green by 4.
Mm-hmm.
They lost to Illinois by 8. They lost to Iowa by 5. And they lost to Ohio State by 14 in the game. They were winning when Mo Ibrahim got hurt.
Yeah.
They were not far off from being a better football team than they were last year. And then they beat West Virginia in the bowl game. So I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing Minnesota went 9-4 last year.
Who did they beat in the bowl game again?
West Virginia 18-6.
We should have seen.
They beat Wisconsin by 10. They blasted Indiana, blasted Northwestern, blasted Maryland, beat Nebraska, who was, as we said, was the best 3-9 team in the history of college football. Beat Purdue at Purdue, blasted Colorado, and beat Miami of Ohio. They're 9-4, and Lindy's has them ranked 56th.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hold on a second. 9-4, schedule's not easy, but it's you've got New Mexico State at home, Western Illinois at home, Colorado at home, dear Lord, at Michigan State. I'm not super sold on Michigan State. That's going to be the first test for me and my theory about Minnesota. Then you're home against Purdue, at Illinois. There's a pretty good chance they're at worst 5-1 heading to Penn State, maybe 6-0. At Penn State, that's an L to me. Then you come back home against Rutgers. At Nebraska is going to be a challenge. So, and then you finish the season off with home games against Northwestern and Iowa, and then at Wisconsin. That's a potential 9-3 year right there. 8, you know what I mean?
It is.
And that's way better than 56th, in my opinion. So, that's a borderline top 25 football team right there.
Yeah.
And they're not getting a lot of love. So you have to know that I believe what I'm telling you for me to put PJ Fleck and James Franklin in my underrated list.
Yeah.
But I really think that Minnesota is going to be a quality team this year.
Yeah.
I do.
Iowa offensively, I think is going to continue to struggle. They lose their big game guys, special teams. They made a lot of plays offensively on reverses and screen passes. The secondary won't be as good, in my opinion. I mean, they're usually good in the trenches. That's who Iowa is. That's their identity.
Mm-hmm. But losing the center doesn't help.
No. And then a really good center, that's an elite center,
first round draft pick at center.
Yeah, right. And Wisconsin is Wisconsin.
Right.
I expect Paul Chris to have them ready, and they will be a good team. Jim Leonard's going to have a good defense.
Yep.
Solid front seven, but they lost a lot at linebacker. So that Big Ten West is going to be interesting.
And I think Nebraska is. I didn't even look to see where Nebraska was because they could be my other one.
I could see Nebraska being a sleeper because they played Ohio State tough. They impressed me in the trenches.
They're 48th here, which they went 3-9 last year, and they got in the top 50. Right?
They just didn't have a quarterback, and they didn't have the guys outside.
They got to prove it to me, but I could see them being a factor in that. My point was I could see them being a factor in this
in the race
in this thing as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Clemson, yep.
We just don't know what to say about Clemson.
Well, sleeper team. We're going to do that before Clemson. Who's your sleeper team? Who's your team that maybe is even ranked in the top 25 that you're not going to say underrated? Because, for me, I'll give mine. Yeah. Mine's Texas.
Right.
And the reason I'm going with Texas as my sleeper team is because I could see Texas not being very good, but I could also see all the things kind of working together, and they're really good.
Yeah.
And win the Big 12. Now, I don't think they're a playoff team, but I think that Texas is a team that I'm not willing to say they're underrated because they still have a lot of question marks for me. But Texas is a team to me that I'm like, I'm not a Quinn Ewers guy. I think Quinn Ewers is a pretty overrated recruit, if I'm going to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
People talking about how, generational this and that. And no, he's not that guy. But he's not terrible either. And he's going to have one of the most explosive receivers in the country to throw to. The receiving core as a whole is going to be pretty decent, in my opinion. You got Xavier Worthy, who's coming back. He'll be a sophomore. You've got Jordan Worthy, who's a nice player. Isaiah Nayer. You've got some other weapons at receiver. You got one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in the country, coming back in Bijan Robinson. They return 3 starters on the offensive line. They just signed one of the best offensive line classes in the country. It's not like 7 or 8 guys.
Yeah.
A couple of them are capable of playing as freshmen. And Kyle Flood's one of the best O-line coaches in the country. And so when I look at Texas, I see a team that just didn't know how to win last year. Like, you look at their game, Sean, what they finished 5-7? Isn't that what they were last year? 5-7?
They dominated Oklahoma early.
Right.
Dominated Oklahoma.
They didn't know how to win.
Yeah.
They lost. They blew out Texas Tech. I mean, they were 4-1 at one point. Then they choked the game away to Oklahoma. They blew a fourth quarter lead twice against Oklahoma State. Lost to Baylor by a touchdown. Lost to Kansas in overtime, and lost at West Virginia by 8. They just didn't know how to win.
Yeah.
But they could have won. There was only one game last year they couldn't have won, and they got blown out by who? It was like some weird Iowa State smacked them. They had a chance to win every other game that they played in.
Yep, I agree.
The reason I'm not ready to say they're underrated, because I could see them being a top 10 team by the year's end. But the reason I'm not ready to go there yet and say they're underrated and more as a sleeper team is because I don't know if Steve Sarkisian can fix that.
Yeah.
He wasn't exactly a world beater at Washington. When they were 7-6, 8-5, pretty much every year. He's never shown me he can be a guy that can get that team to that level. As a head coach, offensive coordinator, different story.
Yeah.
And so it's more of a question mark. But if Sarkisian has learned from his USC Washington days and has that team can get that team to know how to win, that's the most, to me, the best roster in the Big 12 top to bottom. And he's put together a pretty good coaching staff.
I agree.
So that's my sleeper team. I'm not ready to say they're underrated yet because they got a lot to prove to me. But if the pieces all fit and he can push the right buttons, I could see Texas being a top 10 team by the year's end. Yep. And
my sleeper team, Cincinnati.
Okay. They're just being dismissed as a top 25.
They are being dismissed, and I think at this point, Fickle has laid the foundation that they're a program now. Like that last couple of years are more of a trend than just something that's going to have this precipitous fall off. And I don't see that. So
they are 21st in Lindy's.
Yeah, I can see them easily being in the top 10.
The first game of the year is going to be the key.
Yeah.
At Arkansas. That's going to be the key.
That's another possible sleeper team.
Yeah. I thought it was, hiring
Sam Pittman. KJ's back at quarterback.
I love KJ. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's back. Yeah. They did lose Treylon Burks, but they had a kid transfer in.
Yeah.
They had a transfer in too. But the at Arkansas game is key. They got to be competitive there. I mean, they can win the rest of their games. Kennesaw State, Miami of Ohio, Indiana, at Tulsa, home against South Florida, at SMU, who lost their coach,
right?
At UCF, Gus Malzahn, whatever. Navy at home, ECU at home, at Temple, home against Tulane. I mean, they're going to run off the rest of their games, right?
That first game is the game.
If they can win that game, so that's like, to me, to drop them from a playoff team to not even in the top 20, some don't even have them in the top 25.
Yeah.
Seems to be where if they can beat Arkansas, Sean, we could potentially be talking about them being undefeated again.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. I mean, they lost their offensive coordinator too, right? They lost their special teams coach. I mean, they lost one of their DB coach, Ohio State. That's the thing that gives me pause is they lost some really good football coaches. But they've got some play. I mean, Evan Prater, the kid that are they projecting Evan Prater to be the starting quarterback? Because he was a 4-star recruit. And he was a good football player coming out of high school. Let me see here. Yeah, they have Evan Prater projected to be the starting quarterback this year. He was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. Corey Kiner is their running back. He transferred in from LSU. Yeah. He was a 4-star running back that had a Notre Dame offer. Jaden Thompson was a dude for them last year. Tyler Scott he's the kid that smoked Kyle Hamilton for a touchdown. And they got all 5 starters coming back on the offensive line. They're not going to be bums all of a sudden on offense.
No.
Right? I mean, and I like Desmond Ridder, but I love their offensive coordinator, Gino Guidugli. You remember him?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I look at them, Sean, and I know they lost a lot on defense. I get it. I get it. But they got a lot of kids coming back that, like Jaheim Thomas, one of their linebackers, he's a 4-star recruit. Malik Van, 4-star recruit. Juwan Briggs, 4-star recruit. So for all the people that love the recruiting rankings, they got some dudes, but I just don't see them going from playoff team to outside the top 25 like some people are projecting.
Yeah.
I just don't. And so, but the first game is going to be the key, Sean.
I agree.
That's going to be the key. If they can beat Arkansas or even just take Arkansas down to the wire and then run the table, they're going to be a top 20 football team.
Yep.
I mean, if that happens, they're going to be in the New Year's Six Bowl because they're going to get that Group of 6 invitation. They're going to be the highest ranked Group of 6 team at that point in time. All right, Clemson. This is interesting because part of us wanted to have Clemson in the overrated category.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like, people are just assuming Clemson is going to jump back into the top 4, and like Lindy's has them in the playoff. All right, they have them ranked 4th. I'm like I think the lowest I've seen them ranked is 5th.
Yeah.
And my thought is, why? Right? Like, well, okay, reason number 1, track record. Okay. Right. Reason number 2, that defensive front 7 is going to be filthy. I'll be honest with you right now, though. You can say whatever you want about Notre Dame secondary. I would not trade their secondary for Clemson's. Would not. They have Notre Dame's 2 best secondary players are better than Clemson's 2 best secondary players. Fact. Now, the difference is Clemson has a better front 7 right now.
Absolutely.
And they're one of the few teams in the country that I think can say that.
Yep.
And their front 4 especially. I mean, we can maybe debate linebacker, maybe they're much better than Notre Dame. Maybe Notre Dame's better than them, depending on what you think of Maris Fowl. But to me, it's like they're just better, right? With all due respect, I love Notre Dame's guys, but they're just better. But offensively, I think there's this assumption that I think people are still working with the assumption that DJ Ucla is a 5-star quarterback. And I think they're working with an assumption that last year was just a down year for them. And the problem is me, you, Vince, all called Clemson's fall off last year. Because what we saw in 2019 and 2020 is what nobody else saw, which was they had 2 dudes on that football team. I'd argue 3. I want to throw Amari Rodgers in there. But they had 3 guys on that offense in 19 and 20 that masked a lot of holes on that football team.
Yes.
And that was Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, and Amari Rodgers. And they were just able to out-talent some people, which is why they got embarrassed the way that they did in their postseason games in those 2 years. LSU just worked them. Now, that was a great LSU team. Trevor Lawrence had to put that team on his shoulders to beat Ohio State. They got outplayed by Ohio State on almost every other position except one, quarterback.
Yep.
2020, they went and played Ohio State, and even Trevor wasn't good enough to rescue that team. Right. And then they come out last year, and I was not at all surprised by their struggles last year. I mean, some of the teams they lost to surprised me, but we predicted them to fall off last year.
Yeah.
Because, and I don't think that's all of a sudden been fixed because Tony Elliott's not there, as if he was the problem. That dude was the offensive coordinator for 2 national championship teams. Can we stop pretending like he was the problem? Right. Now, from a play calling standpoint, the problem is the quarterback stunk. The problem is the offensive line stunk. Yeah. The problem is they haven't recruited the same way. And they have started recruiting more highly ranked guys that don't fit that offense.
Mm-hmm.
Bunch of tall, highly ranked possession recruit guys, as opposed to, the slots and the speed and that type of thing. They went away from their recipe that worked, even though they had their 2 highest ranked recruiting classes are going to make up this team. So I think their defense is, but here's the thing. Here's the flip of that, Sean, for me. And this is why I didn't put them in the overrated category. Their defense is nasty, and outside of Notre Dame, their schedule is soft.
Super soft.
And that's why I could see them maybe finishing in the top 10, being the ACC champ, maybe being a playoff team, even if they lose to Notre Dame. Because at Georgia Tech, Furman at home, Louisiana Tech at home, at Wake Forest. I don't know what it is, but Wake Forest just does not know how to play against Clemson.
No.
Right? Home against NC State. This is going to define their season, this stretch right here. At Wake, home against NC State, at BC, at Florida State. If they come out of that undefeated, they're going to be a playoff team. Because I even think if they go on the road and lose, Notre Dame's probably not blowing Clemson out. Even if they beat them, they're not going to blow. Their defense is too good to get blown out, in my opinion.
No.
If they lose a close
they
game to Notre
Dame, turn the ball over
a bunch.
to
Yeah.
get blown out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have. Yeah, you're right, Sean. It'd have to be something like that. It'd have to be something like Notre Dame, NC State in 2017,
right?
Where you have a pick six, another turnover that sets you up a score, that kind of thing. Then they finished the year at 3 straight home games against Louisville, Miami, and South Carolina. I think Miami's going to be a top 25 team, and so that'll be a quality win. I think Louisville's going to be a decent team. I think South Carolina's going to be an improved team. So even if they lose to Notre Dame, they got a chance to have 3 good wins if they're undefeated. Yep. So that Wake, NC State, BC, Florida State stretch of their schedule is going to determine whether they're a playoff team or not.
I agree.
So I could see them being in the top 10, even though I don't think this is a typical Clemson team.
Yeah, very easily they could lose one of those games as well. Like, because of the quarterback situation. The defense is going to have them in every game, but they have the quarterback situation that could literally give a game away.
And what I said about Wake Forest, for whatever it is, I don't know why, but Wake Forest just doesn't know how to play against – they just know how to play against Clemson. I'm gonna look up the schedule now because I want to kind of back up my point. But like, to me, last year's a perfect example. I mean, we definitely know last year, and I didn't understand why Wake Forest just when you like that was the year. This was their year to beat Clemson, and not only did they not beat Clemson, they got destroyed.
Does Wake Forest?
They haven't beaten them since 2008.
Do they find a chink in the armor with Venables gone?
Right. But here's been the 21-point difference, 24, 49, 60, 14, 22, 20, 14, 49, 29. They haven't had a single-digit margin of victory since 2011 against Clemson.
Yeah.
I mean, Clemson has just dominated them. The flip side, BC under Jeff Hafley is not afraid of Clemson.
No.
Should have beat him 2 years ago, right?
Yep.
And almost beat him last year without Phil Jurkovec.
Yeah.
And so now Clemson's got to come back to Boston College. That's the game that's going to determine both teams' seasons in a lot of ways.
Agreed.
That's going to be a really interesting game, Sean. I think part of it is, and somebody said down there, talking about the Wake issues, the long mesh point, I think there's a merit to that because they try to do that long developing run game stuff, and Clemson's defensive line is just pushing their offensive line back into the – It's like Stanford had that recipe against Oregon for a few years where they just beat them up front.
Right.
But that BC game is it because BC has given them a game twice in 2 years.
Yeah.
And look, BC gave him a game in 2019 as well, if I remember correctly. It was at BC. They won. No, it was 2019. They killed BC. What year was it? Was it the 2018 year? Yes. Clemson beat them 27-7 in 2018.
Yeah.
But if you go back and watch that game, it was a competitive game for a while. Clemson, because BC was beating them up in the trenches.
Right.
It's just they couldn't score. Right. But I mean, because here's what Clemson did leading into that game: 63 points, 41 points, 59 points, 77 points, 27 against BC. And then the next week, 35, 56, 30 against Notre Dame's great defense, and then 44 against Alabama.
Right.
So Clemson is an interesting one, Sean. I just don't know what to do with them.
No, they are the enigma of the 2022 football season. It's like it could go either way.
Yeah, I could see him as I could see him as one of a not very good playoff team, and they'll get destroyed in the playoff if they make it. And then the other one is I could see them dropping. Look, if they lose to BC, I could see them dropping a few. I really could. I'm going to pull their schedule back up here because here's another team. We'll go through the conferences like at some point, but at Wake Forest, do they turn things around? NC State at home, are we right or wrong about them? At BC could be a loss, but if they lose to BC, it would not completely shock me if that team gets shook and goes and loses the next week at Florida State.
Yeah.
Florida State's another interesting team this year, Sean.
This is a very important year for Dabo and that program.
Yeah.
Just big picture.
Mm-hmm.
Very important year.
Yep.
Because I think they have a pretty good quarterback that's coming to campus this year. And if they can kind of reestablish themselves and build off of that with him going into the next couple of years, I think they'll be okay. But like you said, if they falter a little bit,
it could be the end.
Yeah.
And he's made some questionable hires, questionable because they're just unknowns. It's a bunch of former players.
Yeah.
His O-line coach has never been an O-line coach. He's a former player. Promoting Brandon Streeter to the offensive coordinator job, former player. I mean, he's hired a lot of those the defensive coordinator now is a guy that a couple years ago was like the personal assistant basically to Bruce Arians.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so that's who you replaced Brent Venables with. You know what I mean? Like, you had a Ferrari. You had a Ferrari and you handed the keys to some dude that was a valet.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's a great analogy.
Now it's either going to be really bad because he's a freaking valet, or he's a valet who's driven a lot of cars and he knows how to drive that sucker. Right. And he may not be you know what I mean? Like, it's going to go one of two ways.
That's a street racer.
Right. And you just didn't know it. This is what he did kind of as a side hustle to, so it could go one of two ways. Right.
Yep.
And I don't know how it's going to go.
Yeah.
But they're a very intriguing team for me.
Yeah.
And here's a sleeper team in the ACC, and I'll leave it at this: Florida State. Florida State has a lot coming back. They were a team that last year is a lot like Texas. They just didn't know how to win. Yeah. They lost in overtime to Notre Dame, lost by 3 points to Jacksonville State, blew a lead at home against Louisville, lost by 8, lost by 10 at Clemson in a competitive game. Clemson put away late.
Yeah.
Lost to NC State convincingly. Then they beat Miami, beat BC on the road, and then only lost by 3 at Florida.
Yeah.
They're another team that was not – I mean, if they can learn how to win, they're going to surprise some people.
Yeah, Travis.
And the Clemson game could be the game. There's 2 games for me that could go a long way towards determining Florida State. And I think if Norvell doesn't show promise this year, he's never going to do it.
Yeah.
He just won't get the patience.
Yeah.
He's got 2 chances to really make a statement. Number 1, and they're LSU on a neutral field in game 2. That's game 1 for LSU. That's game 2 for Florida State.
Yeah.
They played Duquesne the week before, and who was I think a playoff team, FCS playoff team last year.
Right.
And then, bye week, and then, at Louisville, tough, BC at home, tough, Wake at home, tough, at NC State, tough. Like, this is a tough stretch. But then if they can just be like, if they can beat LSU and let's say they lose 2 of those games and all of a sudden they're 4-2, all of a sudden you beat Florida State or Clemson at home. You're now 5-2, 6-2. You've got Florida at home, Louisiana at home, Georgia Tech at home, at Syracuse, all winnable games. And then you lose at Miami. Yeah. All of a sudden you got a 9-3 year and you've turned this thing around.
Right.
If you can beat Clemson. So LSU and Clemson, but if you lose both of those games, you have no chance of being over 500.
Right.
In my opinion.
Right.
So that's a team to watch. But that Clemson-Florida State game is going to mean a lot for both teams. And a Florida State-Clemson game hasn't meant a lot in a while.
No.
So it'll be interesting to see that. So